Put your ribbon there. We'll be coming back to it. I want to read about the first 4 verses or so. Daniel 6, starting at verse 1. It seemed good to Darius to appoint 120 satraps over the kingdom, that they would be in charge of the whole kingdom, and over them 3 commissioners, of whom Daniel was one, that these satraps might be accountable to them, and that the king might not suffer loss. Then this Daniel began distinguishing himself among the commissioners and the satraps, because he possessed an extraordinary spirit, and the king planned to appoint him over the entire kingdom. Then the commissioners and the satraps began to try finding ground of accusation against Daniel in regard to the government affairs, but they could find no ground of accusation or evidence of corruption, inasmuch as he was faithful, and no negligence or corruption was to be found in him. Again, keep your ribbon there. We'll be coming back to that. We're going to be talking about facing the test of life. Of course, Daniel is our model for that. And we have a testing to see whether we're counterfeit or not. Now, we've all seen it at the stores where they run that little pin across your $20 bill or whatever you happen to lay out there. And fortunately, I have yet to know a person who got their $20 bill back and said this is counterfeit. I'm sure it's happened because they're doing it. But we're testing ourselves to see if we are truly sincere. So Daniel was put to the test, and as verse 4 says, that's rather in a public manner. They were really looking at some things, and you know how nasty politics can get. We don't even need to discuss that one. But Daniel won because he was consistent, and this is our secret. To be consistent in everything that we do. This builds the foundation. This gives us the undergirding and the strength for when we get into situations that do become more public. And by public, it doesn't have to be at the level that Daniel was at. Public for you could just be something in your workplace, and the whole workplace or the whole shift is upset about it. Or it could just be a family issue where it's not just husband and wife or parent and child dealing with an issue, but the whole extended family has gotten involved. Those things happen. But I would say most of our tests do not fall into what you could technically call the public category. Most of them are rather private. And what we find is that when we are tested, it doesn't create us, it uncovers us. And this is really, really important. Somebody said money doesn't make the man, money reveals the man. And it's the same thing with tests. Tests don't make us. We don't just all of a sudden pop up and find superhuman strength to do what we need to do. We've been building that from day one. And then we have the test. And then we find out how well we've been doing on developing that underlying strength. So the secret is to be who God wants us to be when nobody is looking. And that is the consistency that we're talking about. In those little, what appear to be insignificant moments where nobody in the community would really give it a second thought, you just got stupid with the cashier or the person behind the counter because they were slow, they messed up your order, you acted a fool a minute, and somebody further back in the line said to themselves, well, that person's a jerk. But nothing ever came of it. No one ever published it. It didn't get put on Facebook or Instagram or anything like that. And you really want to look at, what am I doing when no one's looking or very few people are looking? What are we becoming in the unseen places? Because that's what's going to be made visible. And if you're one of those lucky people where it doesn't get made visible during this lifetime, it will be made visible when we come to the judgment seat of Christ, as Ecclesiastes 12 and 14 tells us. He's going to reveal every secret thing. Nothing gets past it there. So you got to be really careful and be aware that just because I am getting by with it here, that I did fool the people around me, I never fool God. I never ever fool God. So first we have the poison of envy. And we read that there in verse 3. They were getting jealous because Daniel was being promoted. And they were looking for a way to keep him from being promoted. And sometimes there are people like in the workplace who would be more popular with us who get envious of us and they choose resentment over unity. They don't like it when they see somebody else rise, because when somebody else shines brighter, it makes them feel like they're not shining as bright. And so a lot of people have this idea is the way to shine brighter is to put other people's light out. That's not the way to do it. Of course, what we want to do is we want to shine brighter. Truly, really shine brighter. I suppose all of us know people at work who complained about not getting a promotion, and you knew why they didn't get the promotion, because you've seen them avoid work, not work, work harder not to work than they would have worked if they had actually done their work, that kind of thing. And then that envy is just going to start growing, and it's going to be ugly. Envy's never a really pretty thing. We don't give out awards for envy. We don't build statues to honor people who are envious. It is just a poison that resides in our own heart, and it poisons us, and then it seeps out and it gets ugly with other people. And that's the last thing you want. And it's really strange in my opinion, but it does happen when a parent becomes envious of their child. I'm like, that one is hard for me to process, but it happens. People do that kind of thing. And then it leads to some really poor judgment, and that's going to get us into deeper and deeper trouble. What we have to do is we have to learn to back up, and we have to learn to celebrate the successes of other people. We'll talk about that a little more later on. But anytime I look at somebody else and I'm envious, that's just self-destructive. If envy were the path of success, then people would be reveling in success all over the place. It would be easy. All you have to do is envy somebody, and all of a sudden you're going to be elevated. Well, we know it doesn't work that way. What happens is people start envying, and then we see it in somebody else, and we may tolerate it because, we don't have a whole lot of people in our life. Can't kick everybody out, right? And so you tolerate it, but you don't admire it. You don't look at a coworker that's envious and go, I really like old Chuck. He's the most envious person I've ever met. One of these days when I grow up, I'm going to be just as envious as he is. No, we don't do that. It's kind of like somebody's got a big old stain on the side of their chin after eating lunch, and you see it there and you kind of giggle about it. You don't like it. It's ugly, but you just tolerate it because at some level you just have to tolerate other folks. So what I want us to look at first is, does the success of another person stir up resentment or gratitude? And I'm going to suggest that it ought to stir up gratitude. What the success of other people says to me anyway is that success is possible. And when you look at some of the stories of success that are the major super successes now, if you look at Elon Musk, do you know his backstory? Do you know how he started? Do you know how he scratched by and he and his brother shared time sleeping in shifts so the other could operate a computer because they shared one computer building their first business idea, and they scratched and clawed their way into success? Now, what that tells me is that success is possible and the doors are open if we provide a service other people want. One of our problems in the world today are we got all these people envious of the rich, and so their solution for their lack of creativity and their lack of devotion and their lack of putting themselves in and making the sacrifices is, it's going on big time. What's New York all about right now? Let's tax the rich. And where's that going to go? That's going to go the same place Cuba went, and that's going to go the same place Venezuela went, and that's going to go the same place the USSR went. Some of the young folks are going, USSR, what was that? But anyway, so the success of other people, instead of looking at it and becoming envious of it, ought to be, it's possible. Now, is it a guarantee? No, it's not a guarantee, but it's possible to climb the ladder if you're willing to make the sacrifices. And so instead of the poison of envy, you ought to get the poison of hope. And who else is going to be Elon Musk? Somebody told me he was just projected or just made the first trillionaire status ever. Okay. Chances of any of us making the trillionaire status are pretty slim. Now, if you do, I'm going to start preaching tithe, let me tell you. No, I'm teasing on that. So, if you do make the trillionaire status, that's really cool. That's good. But what if I don't make the trillionaire status? What if I only get to the billionaire status? Boy, that'd be a failure, wouldn't it? What if I only get to the 500 millionaire status? Well, you're really a failure there. You see, when we get over envy and we give it the hope and we start looking at what can I make of my marriage, my family relationships, my spirituality, and I don't worry about envy. I worry about how far can I push myself. Then all kind of opportunities open up. And that's all based on gratitude. The psychologists like to debate a little bit which is more important, gratitude or love. And they can't universally agree on it. We go, well, love's the most important, right? Because we're thinking Bible, 1 John 4:8, God is love. And I would kind of fall in that direction. But gratitude is just right there, nipping at its heels. If you don't have gratitude, love's not going to do you a lot of good. So our thing is we have to live above reproach. It's easy to live right on the surface. So a lot of us got here at 9:30. That's when the first people start coming in, and I could, if I wanted, name you the first 4 people that are going to be at the building almost every service half an hour before. And I can tell you the next 2, they're going to come in about 9:35, 8:35, and so on and so forth, And so for that 20, 30 minutes, folks, we look good. We do look good. We always get delayed in our start. We say we start at 9 o'clock. Now we've kind of accepted we're going to start at 9:03, 9:05. And I looked at Sister Mary today because I was talking to her while Chris was standing up here waiting for him to sit down. And I said, I think we like each other around here because everybody's just busy talking. And we do look good on the surface. There's no question about that. The question is deep within where God's looking, where I can't look, where you can't look. And I'm glad we can't see each other that deep. Are we right there? Because that's where our character is going to grow, where God's looking in our daily consistency to the small things. He said over in Luke, what was that, 16:10, if you're unfaithful in what is least, you'll be unfaithful in much. If you're faithful in what is least, you'll be faithful in much. And so you start looking at those small little inconsequential things that really nobody cares about. And it may be that nobody cares about it. It's just you. But can you be consistent even then? Now, I do want to mention that integrity does not mean you're an absolutely flawless, 100% perfect person. I don't think Daniel was 100% absolutely flawless, never ever committed a sin. He was absolute perfection. I'm sure he had some thoughts he didn't need to have. I'm sure there were a time or two when somebody did something and he wanted to look over at Shadrach and Abednego and go, can you believe that fool over there? I mean, this is humanity. These are the things that we understand aren't ideal of us, but they happen. But we can have integrity that's consistent. We can be those people who live such a life that the opposition can only say whiny things like, well, I saw you in the grocery store once and you didn't say hi to me. How many of you done that? You're busy shopping, you're all caught up in what you're doing, somebody else is talking to you, and somebody you know walks right past you and you never saw them. And then they get all uppity about it and want to text you or give you a phone call. Now, if that hadn't happened to you, that's because you're not the preacher. I've had it happen, literally. I saw you at such and such place and you just ignored me like I wasn't even there. Well, I did. I didn't know they were there. They just blended into the background. But if that's the only kind of complaints you're getting, like that's good. Because nobody bats an absolute 1,000. The complaints you don't want to get was I saw him staggering out of the bar and get in his car and drive home. I saw him beating his wife. I saw him yelling or cursing. I saw him cheating. You know, you get the idea. Those deep consequential things. So a person isn't going to suddenly become above approach. It's going to be in the little bitty daily things. And if you can get into 2 Corinthians 10:5, where he says we bring every thought in captivity to the obedience of Christ. When I say little bitty things, we're going to start right there. You're going to start right at that point where you see or think something and you catch it and you go, I don't need to be thinking that. And you stop. I don't know how not to have the thought. I hadn't figured that one out yet. If I ever figure that out, I will share it with you. But I do know how to recognize the thought and go, that's not appropriate. Let's do like Barney Fife and nip it in the bud. And let's just not give it any room to grow. Let's stop it right there. That's going to start building the little things. That's going to be your steady consistency that people look at you. And sure, you irritate one another now and then. If we spend much time with one another, this is humanity. No one is going to do what I want them to do 100% of the time. They're not going to have 100% of the opinions I want them to have. They're not going to have 100% of the way I think they ought to be managing their life. And I'm not going to have it in their view either. And at times there's just going to be a little bit of rub. Again, that's humanity. I don't know how to get rid of that. But I do know that the same people that rub me the wrong way now and then, I can look at it and go, but I never caught them stealing. I never caught them, the things that just violate trust and total betrayal. You go, this person is trustworthy. I know I got their back and I know they got mine. I know we're on the same team. We don't always make the same play, but that's getting too picky. So are we living the same integrity in private that we live in public? That's the real test. Because if you're living in private, nobody but you in the house, or you and your pet in the house, and you're still interested in living in integrity, then when something blows up on the outside, like happened with Daniel, he got promoted. Nothing wrong with being promoted, right? He got promoted, and then other people start getting envious, and as we're going to see, they try to bring him down, and yet he stands. And that's where we want to be. So we're going to have pressure. Satan's going to test us with the small compromises, and those are the ones that I think are probably most effective. How many of you would go rob a bank? Don't raise a hand, please. How many of you would say something cranky and snappy if you didn't have a good night's sleep? Most of us have. Probably all of us have more times than we can count, Those little things, that's where Satan comes in. Now, saying something cranky or snappy is not always wrong, but it can create a little bit of a divide in a relationship. Just a little bit. But all Satan needs is a little bit of a crack, right? And if you get just a little bit of a crack, you can get a little bit more, and then a little bit more, and over time, all of a sudden, things change tremendously. So we want to watch the small stuff, keep the eyes on the little things. So Daniel simply refused to compromise. We're going to jump ahead down to verse 10. Daniel knew the document was signed. He entered his house. Now in his roof chamber, he had a window open toward Jerusalem, and he continued kneeling on his knees 3 times a day, praying and giving thanks before God as he had done previously. He just wasn't going to do it. And if it meant he was going to die, then he was going to die. He knew what the decree was. He knew what the king had signed. So his devotion and his faith weren't on the table. They weren't negotiable. That's just, it was a done deal. He made his choice a long time ago. I think if we'll look back just at chapter 1 and verse 8 of Daniel, we can see that choice that he made when it all began. But Daniel made up his mind that he would not defile himself with the king's choice food or with the wine which he drank. So he sought permission from the commander of the officials that he might not defile himself. It started early. Now, it started before that. He already had that integrity ingrained in him, and had he not, he would have done what everybody else did. That's just food. It's just a little glass of wine. What's the big difference there? No, he made a choice, and we make that choice. Matthew 10:28, he says, "Don't fear those who can kill the body And after that, have no more that they can do to you. I'll tell you who to fear. Fear him who, after he has killed the body, can destroy the soul in hell. So there's where your fear needs to be. Joshua 24:15, of course, you know that one. That's where Joshua says, choose you this day whom you will serve. And you make a choice. And then you dedicate to that choice. You make some commitment to it. And then when the pressure comes along, the pressure exposes whether we really have the conviction of our faith, or whether we're just one of those people that like to, kind of prance around and look good on the surface, because looking good on the surface is easier than having that deep conviction that says, I don't care if anybody's watching or not. I'm not doing that. That's wrong. That is not legal. I'm not doing it. End of story. So the question before us is not whether pressure will come. It's coming. We all know that. Anybody not know that yet? The question is, how are we going to respond to it when it does? And that's when we get our test. That's when we are revealed. It's easy to sit back and say, well, if such and such happened, I'll tell you what I'm going to do. I'm going to blah, 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 blah. And we plan a good plan. Okay, that's all right. Good planning is good. God wants to know what you're actually going to do. There's where we find out. And now the devil is shrewd. All threats aren't equal in appearance at all. So if somebody came up to you and said something really crazy like, this happened in Pine Bluff, actually. Some of you will remember the story, but I won't go into that much detail. There was a gentleman in Pine Bluff rather unsettled with his wife. And he approached a couple of men in the community who he just thought looked like they would carry out a little plan for him and murder his wife for him. I see some smiling. Y'all remember the story, don't you? And the guys, I don't know who the guys were he solicited, but they went straight to the cops and said, we got a problem here, right? That's a big one. When somebody says, hey, I got an idea, you're going to help me kill so-and-so. You're going like, no. But what if it's a little bit less or a lot less in appearance? And that's where the shrewdness of Satan comes in. So Daniel, he did face a very unique threat. He was set up. This was a big political move, and he had to make a choice. But Satan, 1 Peter 5:8, he roams about like a roaring lion, seeking whom he may devour. And he doesn't need a big thing. Just a little thing. And if he can get it small enough where you don't pay attention to it, he'll get the seed planted. And then he'll water it and nurture it. And he'll make it keep growing and growing until it becomes a big thing. So now the king's decree was absolutely legal because he got to set the laws. Well, that was something, wasn't it? But in Acts 5:29, Peter said we ought to obey God rather than man. And so there are a lot of things in our society that are totally legal. And depending on which state you're in, there's different things that are legal. You don't have to go too far. You can get legal THC or weed or whatever you want. And some states you get, well, I guess Arkansas, you get legal gambling, right? We've got Saracen Casino out there. And then you go to other states and you get other things that are legal. I mean, you can find something legal almost anywhere you want to go. And if you don't find it in America, if you like to travel the world, you can go find it somewhere else. But that doesn't make it right. So the king's decree was legal. Daniel could have said, look, the king said it, it's the law. Now, he didn't have Romans 13 back then where it says obey the laws of the land. That was after Daniel, but he could have made some similar argument. But he understood, no, I obey God. My devotion is to God. He's the one I stand with. And so you're going to be willing to see the threat, not rationalize it out, and, start backpedaling. And just because something is not wrong initially does not mean it's okay. Let me see if I can pull this off the top of my head. I believe it's 1 Corinthians 10:23. Let's take a little adventure here just a second. That's it. Paul said, all things are lawful, but not all things are profitable. All things are lawful, but not all things edify. Just because I can say step one is not illegal, step one is lawful, it is allowable, doesn't mean I'm moving in the right direction. I can be making legal steps and still move in the wrong direction. And that's one of the things Satan loves to do with us, is to play us for a fool or lug us up, or some folks I know call it setting you up to be the crash dummy. So when something presents itself as reasonable, but it pulls us away from what's faithful, will we recognize it for what it is? And that's our challenge. Because of the shrewdness of the devil, he can sneak in there. And Daniel could have done the same thing. Well, I'll pray. I'll just close the curtains. You know, what does it really matter if the curtains are open or closed anyway? God knows the heart. God sees the heart. He already had 1 Samuel 16:7, right? God doesn't look on the outer appearance, but on the inner. So I'll just close the curtains. It's just a 30-day decree. It'll be all right. And Daniel wouldn't compromise even that much. I think that's interesting. And then he's in the den. Of course, you know how the story unfolds. The guys catch him praying, and then they're out to get him. They think they've got him. The king stays up all night trying to find a way to get Daniel out of it. He can't get Daniel out of it. So he finally has to put Daniel in the den, and the king loses his sleep all night. And we finally get down to around verse 16. The king gave orders, and Daniel was brought in and cast into the lion's den. And the king spoke and said to Daniel, your God whom you constantly serve will himself deliver you. I kind of like the king's confidence there. A stone was brought and laid over the mouth of the den, and the king sealed it with his own signet ring and with the signet ring of his nobles, so that nothing would be changed in regard to Daniel. Then the king went off to his palace, spent the night fasting. Interesting. And no entertainment was brought before him, and his sleep fled from him. Then the king rose at dawn at the break of day and went in haste to the lion's den. And when he came near to the den to Daniel, he cried out with a troubled voice. The king spoke and said to Daniel, servant of the living God, as your God whom you constantly serve. Notice, constantly serve, been able to deliver you from the lion. And Daniel spoke to the king, O king, live forever. My God sent his angel and shut the lion's mouth, and they have not harmed me, inasmuch as I was found innocent before him, and also towards you, O king, I've committed no crime. And of course, you can read the king was very pleased with that. So Daniel's in a really, 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 really ugly place. But because of the condition in his heart, he's in the safest place he could be. There's no harm going to befall him. Doesn't matter that it's out there visual around him. He's in a fortress in the den. God is in control. That's a hard one to swallow, isn't it? Now, I think that here's where we are. Daniel in the lion's den. He's in the lions are sitting around. I'm going to just pretend they're purring like kitty cats, and everything is safe and comfortable. And we go, okay, I like that story. God's in control. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, they refuse to bow to the image. The king heats up the furnace 7 times hotter, and they walk into it, and they walk out. Not even with the smell of smoke on them. I like God being in control there, right? Acts chapter 7. God's still in control. How did that end for Stephen? Oh, that ended with his death. I don't like God being in control now. You see, and when we have those emotions, what that tells us is, I am still too invested in the flesh. Because Christ said, do not fear those who can kill the body. You're already dead. You're already giving the body up. It's just a question of when. But, we get entangled in that. So God wasn't Daniel's last resort. God had been in Daniel's heart from who knows when. We can take that back to Daniel chapter 1. We saw that in verse 8. But we can certainly understand it was in his heart long before that. He had been Daniel's center. The seek diligently God, seeking the face of God, which is Old Testament teaching also. So God didn't keep him out of the lion's den. He led him into the test. And then because he passed the test, we have Daniel becoming a consistent figure in a pagan government for a long time. And if Daniel could be faithful as an official in a pagan government, you and I can be faithful as just mere citizens in a government that does some things that we all kind of questions. Our individual outcomes vary, of course, on how our tests are going to unfold. Everybody's life is different. Now, there's really nothing new under the sun. It's just if I compare my story to your story specifically, there's going to be differences. Now, if I compare your story to humanity in general, out of all the history of people, 106 billion people have lived on planet Earth, there have been millions of people who have your story, almost down to the same detail. Well, my daddy was mean to me. My mama abandoned me. My wife this or that, or my husband this or that, or my boss this or that, or my family or my country or whatever. Our individual stories are repeated millions of times in the history of man. The reason we don't always make that connection is because I look at the 6 people closest to my life, maybe the 7 closest, and I go, well, they got a good life. They got a good life. They got a good life. Life's just not fair. Life's not treating me right. I forget to look at the really big picture of what's going on. So our individual outcomes vary, but God always remains constant. So are we building our lives on what can be taken away? That's a materialist build. Or are we building them on God who remains? Daniel built on the God who remains. And thus he has his victory at so many levels. So let's close up. The lion's den. Definitely not the beginning of faith. Daniel had been building his faith for a long, long time, and all those little quiet choices he had been making over the years. Integrity is about being consistent. That's all. Just consistency in the little bitty things. Colossians 3:23, whatever you do it as though you're doing it for the Lord. And then when the pressure comes along, it's going to reveal. Now, let me be careful here. When the pressure comes along, I'm not saying it will not hurt. I'm saying you will still act in a godly way in the midst of your hurt if you have been building that relationship with God. The tears will still come. The disappointment will still be there. I'm sure Daniel felt betrayed and maybe his feelings were hurt. Maybe he thought some of those people would take his side. I don't know. We don't know that. But he didn't give in to, well, you got to fight fire with fire. If you're going to get down in the gutter, I'm going to get down in the gutter with you. He didn't know. That's what's going to be revealed. So if we have our life anchored in God, it will not be free of hardships, but we'll still behave like a Christian ought to behave. So if we examine it closely, not just one moment, but over time, look at a long stretch and story of your life. Does it show a faith that holds or one that shifts when the pressure shifts? Final slide. A life that is built, a faithful life is built long before the lion's den appears. Pressure doesn't create character. It reveals it. And what it revealed with Daniel was a character that we can look up to and admire and respect. And isn't that what we want? A character that people can look at and admire and respect? Absolutely. But the one I really, really want is, now you ladies don't have to do this in the way I'm getting ready to describe it. But every morning I got to shave this face. And I got to look in the mirror when I'm shaving this face. And I want to be able to look in that mirror and respect the integrity I see looking back. Now, you ladies do it different. I know you look in the mirror too. You're just not having to shave. And you want to be able to look at that image in the mirror and have the same satisfaction of, I'm doing it right. I can respect myself. And I think that is one of the most valuable things. Let's call it the second most valuable thing. I want God's approval, most valuable. And that I want to be able to truly have my approval of myself based on biblical teachings. There you have your foundation. So I guess the question is, do you have your foundation? Are you building on it? Are you working on it? I hope you are. A little bit every single day, all in the little bitty things. And if you're not, and we can help you in any way, let us know. While together we stand.